All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our little virtual event space. We wish you were all here in person, of course, but we are also so grateful to be able to share this virtual event space with all of you. Hi, Danielle. So my name is Allie. I will be your host for this evening, and I am so excited to be introducing two dear friends of Third Place Books, Olivia Waite and Lish McBride, here to discuss Olivia's the newest book in Olivia's Feminine Pursuit series, the Hellions Waltz. So before we get into the fun stuff, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in and, of course, for buying books. For those of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area, and your support really is what keeps us here selling books, and we really love what we do. So if you also love what we do, we would so appreciate it if you swing by, grab some copies, or if you're not local, we of course do ship. I will be linking books in the chat all evening, so they should be super easy to go find, and we are always, of course, so grateful for your support. So while you are over on our website, I definitely recommend checking out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up over the next few months, and if you'd like to stay in touch with our events, you can sign up for our newsletter. It is a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. So we are here for about an hour, and towards the end, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other. But when it comes time for questions, do make sure those end up in the Q&A just so that we can most easily find them. And with that, I believe that's all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce Olivia Waite, who writes fantasy, sci-fi, and historical romance, including her wonderful Feminine Pursuit series, which began with the Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, which I absolutely just adored. She is also the monthly romance columnist for the Seattle Review of Books, where she writes romance reviews and essays, which you should absolutely all go check out if you haven't already. It is so good. Her newest book, The Hellions Waltz, which came out yesterday, so happy book birthday. Maddie needs her one successful heist to fund the Weavers Union forever, but finds her plans jeopardized by Sophie, who loathes a swindler, leaving Maddie only one choice: seduce Sophie to the cause. And maybe in other ways too. In conversation this afternoon, I am so happy to welcome Lish McBride, the author of spooky and hilarious young adult books, such as the award-winning Hold Me Closer Necromancer, Necromancing the Stone, Firebug, and Pyromantic. She has published short stories in The Normal School, Tor.com, and the anthologies Cornered, What to Read in the Rain, Kisses and Curses, and Freaks and Other Family. Her newest book, Curses, is a Beauty and the Beast retelling with a beautiful boy and a beastly girl, and it comes out next month and is available for pre-order, so I will be linking that in the chat. Keep an eye for it. And with that, just thank you both so much for being here. I am so excited to be a fly on the wall for this conversation. If you need anything, give me a shout. That goes for everyone in chat as well. I will be keeping an eye on that. And with that, I will pass this off to our authors. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
It's always wonderful to be here, Allie. We miss the bookstore dreadfully, but it's really nice that we can do this virtually and, ignore geography a bit for a while.
The upside to Zoom is I'm very, I keep wanting to do sort of hands. I talk to you. It's like, yes.
See, and you're not even in the murder shack.
I'm not. I opted for a more internet stable area of my house that also had the books, actual books, not like the wall. And then I basically kicked my family out just for you. So we could talk about books because they're loud. So to begin our discussion, how does it feel to finish your series? Is it finished? I mean, I know that.
Yeah, this is the whole trilogy. I mean, I was joking on Twitter about because the books are red, yellow, and blue, and I've got all the primary colors, and I've been joking about like putting an orange in between 1 and 2 and a green in between like 2 and 3. But so far it's a 3-book series. There's a prequel novella in the Best Women's Erotica from last year that is about Lady Moth's mother, like the 6th Countess of Moth. But this is the complete series. It's the longest series I've ever written, with the longest novels I've ever written. Like Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows is a doorstopper of a slow burn. And it's a little bit weird. I stopped in to sign book plates. So if you've ordered a copy from Third Place, you'll be getting a signed copy or a signed book plate from me with a little doodle. Sometimes I put the wrong doodle in the wrong book. So if you order Care and Feeding, you should be getting a B, but maybe you'll be getting a music note because I got really into doing music notes yesterday. They had all 3 of them waiting for me at the info desk when I showed up, and it was kind of this like record scratch moment where I'm like, oh, I remember doing this. Like, Lish, when you and I worked there, you know, that we'd get a phone call that an author was expected. We'd have all the books at the info desk with the marker, and then they would show up and it's like, ooh, somebody fancy's coming in. And I'm like, I'm the somebody fancy now. And so it was this real like sense of exactly how much time had passed and how far you'd come. And I was glad I was wearing a mask because underneath it was just like sobs. And I'm like, nobody can tell. It's great.
You need the upper mask, like, so they can't see your crying. Just a whole face, like you don't get anything.
See, is that why Batman wears the cowl on the upper, because he's just secretly crying all the time?
If any superhero is secretly crying, it's Batman.
It's Batman.
Yeah. I mean, he's just so emo. Well, like on top of that, not just seeing all your books, but I mean the covers are so gorgeous. The colors are so lush. I mean the women are stunning, and I think I loved the other 2, but Hellions Waltz, I think particularly the cover is just, it's an eye grabber. I mean,
well, and it's I think the first time they've actually used a photo shoot. Like the other 2 have been like composites, which is really an art form in itself. Like some of the rough ones they were sending me, and I'm like, how are you doing this kind of magic? And it's pretty cool. And then this one, I'm like, oh no, she's grabbing that dress. There's like people interacting, and I think that brings just like a stronger sense of presence. It's my favorite of the 3 too. I love it, and it makes me really happy because this book is really special to me. This was the book I started writing in lockdown, and that I wrote all through the pandemic. And a lot of writers were blocked, and I was blocked in literally every other way. I couldn't read anything. I couldn't really do anything. But I would open up the computer in the morning, I'd type 1,000 words, and then I would slowly shut my computer and let the news bring me to despair. But for those mornings, like before I really even woke up, I had this story to escape into. And it's the only time I've written a manuscript. You know, I mean, Lish, you know, when you're writing a book, there's always one scene that you just kind of dread, or that you're not actually really that excited about, but you have to do it to make the rest of it work. And this book didn't have any of those scenes. There was something in every scene where I was like, oh, I get to do this today. Oh, I get to put this in there. And it felt absolutely the most escapist kind of writing. And hopefully that comes through.
When you have those, yeah, it comes through to the reader. It's that sort of like, there's joy in every moment. You know, and there was so much in there that, and it's one of the things I love reading. Like, I love historical. Thank you. Is the fact that like there's always stuff for me to Google, because like my education's been very hodgepodge. Which, I mean, you were a classics major, so I feel like you have a more in-depth kind of knowledge base. And so there's tons of things that, despite all the books that I read, I was like, I've never heard of that. What is that thing? And so I was constant, which I adore. It's almost like having kind of like Easter eggs throughout, where I'm like, oh, what is this thing?
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many cool tidbits where I'm like, man, you know, Olivia must have had just a blast, like bringing these things in. I mean, like the convict coin, I'd never heard of that.
Oh my gosh, there are so many good ones online too. Like I was spoiled for choice for which one to pick. And there's all these different repeated motifs, and like museums are being really good about digital collections these days. So you can just stare at them for hours.
And just the different instruments. And I mean, there's so much to go from there. So when you're trying to think about like this book series, did you think of the couple first or the plot first? Like, does couple come first for you, or?
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody will be surprised when I say this one, literally the jobs came first, like before anything else. Ladies Guide was actually originally an MF. It was, God, over 10 years ago now. I had this idea. I mean, there were queer people, there was like an actual queer secondary couple in it, even back then, even before I'd realized I was queer, even before I finished fleshing out the idea. But it was when virgin heroes were really popular, and I had this idea for like a young scholar meeting this well-traveled older countess, and she offered to find him a wife and ended up falling in love, that whole thing. And I just kind of like, something about it just felt unfinished, and they had like this secondary like couple of queer men that they were friends with, and I'm like, that would be nice to see. And then one thing led to another. I didn't end up writing it, and then I started, you know, I came out as bi. I started reading a lot more FF romance. I started looking for FF historicals and not finding as many as I thought there should be. And eventually I'm like, well, I'm just gonna have to write one. I'm just like, because there were a few here and there, but like I was hungry. Like I had such a hunger for this. And then I was like, well, you know, that scholar idea, I could just, she could be like, you know, a blue stocking, why not? And then I'm like, well, while I'm doing this, let's just put in everything else I like, you know. So that's where the astronomy came in and the embroidery, and then I just started piling things on. When I sold the trilogy, they said, oh, do you have a series Bible? And I'm like, at this point I have not finished the first book, but I said, give me 5 minutes. And I said, I have some light notes for books 2 and 3. And what I started doing, I just pulled the jobs that seemed to match from the research I'd been doing for book 1 into, you know, work in the Regency and women's work specifically. Not just like as soon as I stepped out of the ballroom, it felt like there was this whole other territory to dive into and explore, and all of these other things happening in this same historical period we're all familiar with. Like everybody likes pulling in like, oh, a lady who does X, but I'm like, we don't need the lady. People were just doing X like all the time. You know, it's always true, like, oh, but women can't own businesses, but no, but they can, and they did. The aristocracy was not supposed to do it.
It makes me sort of like, I mean, and that's one of the things that I loved is the fact that like this book series in particular, you're not just seeing, you know, a slice of the populace that were ignored in general. Like they're not, you don't find them in history books. They were there, like we just kind of, you know, but also the classes and things too. So you've got all these different layers of basically erased history. And so when you had to go back and do your research on that, like how did that, I'm sure it made it more difficult, but how did you approach it?
It was, let's face it, it's a mess. I am not really an organized researcher. I'm a magpie. I snatch something and I put it next to something else, which leads to really interesting things, but also takes a lot of time. So when I was pitching the series, I just was like, okay, well, book 2 will be like, let's do an engraver because that sounds interesting and I know about letterpress stuff. And I don't know, beekeeping would be fun, wouldn't it? Because I'd been
beekeeper.
Yeah, so I'm like, yeah, you know, we've got all these hive innovations that I stumbled on while researching just general Regency jobs, and I'm like, yeah, and then 3 will be, I don't know, a piano tuner and a silk weaver. Obviously those go together. And so I had these pairs of jobs, and all I had to do was come up with not even come up with who the people are, but if you start with the job, you say, what would doing this kind of work, like what impact would that have? What kind of feelings could you build around it, whether positive or negative, you know, because there's a lot about weaving that's really, really interesting and beautiful, but if you have to do it for like 18 hours a day under near starvation wages, then it's not exactly interesting. It's really hard and difficult and, you know, burdensome.
Yeah.
So so for me, it really was about it really is about work in a way, which sounds weird because the work that I do here is mostly sitting behind a keyboard going, but
it's a lot of emotional labor. And I don't think people, and weirdly decision fatigue, and I don't think people
Yes.
really grasp that. I've had to do a lot of pep talks with students over the writing students over the last couple of months.
Yeah.
They're sitting around going like, everyone else seems to be able to write, but I can't write. And it's like, well, sweet pea, like have you seen what's going on around you? It's an emotional labor, and when you have something stressing you out, it's really hard to be creative. It's like you're not. It's not just you. It's
stress doesn't, like, maybe deadline stress is good because then you have to have something, but like, no, like family stress, work stress, everything that was happening last year was.
In so many ways, writing is a thought experiment, and it's hard to think clearly and deeply when your brain is running around like a panicked raccoon.
Yes, and that's exactly how it felt. Was I felt like the voice in the back of my head was just chittering constantly.
Yeah, it's awful. I had to come up with all kinds of tactics on basically like soothing the rabbit animal back into the just to it's fine, because I still had to turn things in, and and
people have deadlines to meet,
and for a lot of people too, sort of like fun books were the ways that they were escaping, and so you're like, if I can write one more joyful thing and put it out there, maybe that will help a little bit. And of course, hold on.
Well, and I actually had a conversation with my therapist briefly, because it turns out when you're in a pandemic and having medical problems and losing family members, your GP will be like, let's get you to talk to somebody. And my therapist was really wonderful about it. And she said explicitly, no, everyone I know is reaching for romance novels and fantasy and escape and fiction. And they're looking for exactly this kind of art. You are doing something really important, and it may never have been more important than it is right now. And that's honestly humbling. It feels like a huge responsibility. It feels also like, it kind of adds to the pressure, but at the same time, man, I've always loved writing romance, but this is probably the most proud I've been of writing romance. Not just mine, but like other people are killing it right now. Like,
because I had a lot of friends that couldn't write or couldn't read over the last year. I went the other direction where I'm compulsively reading, I'm constantly, I'm doing a couple of books a week at least. And listening on audio, and a lot of it's been rereading, because for me that's very soothing, but also trying to find things that are funny and light, and because funny and light, they seem easy, but that's the writer's skill. Like basically, it's sort of very hard. They remind me of kind of like, with baking, it's the souffle, like one little thing you smack and it falls down. Something light and airy and funny, it's that same kind of construction. And so for an author to pull it off where it's so effortless and so funny, and you just have that time where you kind of just immerse yourself in the joy, it's so wonderful. And it is really hard to do. And there's been like a ton of like good romance that I've read recently where I'm just like, yes, thank you, because I can't handle anything really dark, angsty, and none of it.
Right? Like, no, I want everything at a Ted Lasso level, and that's it. That's like Ted Lasso, Cat Sebastian, Alexis Hall.
I mean, it's not been good for my sleep because I keep staying up. Like, I think because you told me to read the new Alexis Hall, and I was like, it's fine. I started it, and I'm like, oh, it's 3:30 in the morning now.
It sneaks up on you, that one. And this is Rosaline Palmer Takes the Cake, which I think I've seen people classifying as more like chick lit than romance because it's a love triangle situation.
Yeah. Which
normally I hate it. Loved this one. Could not have loved it more.
I think I think the reason why it works is because a lot of times to have like a true love triangle, every aspect seems viable. Like she could go either way. And this one, I think, what Alexis Hall's done perfectly is picked tiny, wonderful character details to slowly just show how awful this human is. The guy, the Elaine character, is that how you say Elaine? Alan? I don't even know how to pronounce his name.
I want to say it's Alan.
Yeah, it's everything of this, that little details of pretension. Because I hated him instantly, and I'm like, why do I hate this guy so much? Because I'm like, clearly I'd read the book description, so I knew there was someone else coming in. But to me, that person was never an option. And so
I think for me, there was a moment really early on where she described him as having this very Lord of the Manor come to seduce the dairymaid kind of smile. And I'm like, so he's a creep. So he's that creep.
Well, and I think part of it is it's less of a love triangle and more about her learning to, I mean, there's the love, she does have the love interest, but it's also more about her choosing her. Saying,
yeah,
like,
it's really about like,
I am valid. Everything.
And the first guy definitely feels like you are making the worst decision. And he keeps revealing little hints of who he really is. And there are these little jarring moments and you're like, I don't.
Perfect. They're so, it's.
But yeah, they're not big enough to throw you off, but they're big enough for the reader to go, oh, nope, we hate this guy. We get to hate this guy.
Perfect. And it's one of those things, and it's one of the things actually I really like about romance is I think so much is focused on the character that it has two things that I love. One, banter. Romance wins at banter, hands down, all the time. They have the best banter. But that exploration of character, because it's so much about who these people are. And so I mean, if you're trying to learn how to write and you want to try to learn, like, work on your character work, man, romance is what you need to be reading, because like it's so much about the people, because you're also trying to get the reader to fall in love with them too.
And you have to like give people enough of an archetype that they can, like, because romance readers really like their archetypes. They really like the tropes and the categories and the mixing things up of familiar elements. So you have to be familiar enough that they'll recognize what you're doing, but you can't be so cookie cutter that it feels generic. And that balance is really complex and it's fun. And it's the moment when, as a romance writer, when you can sit there and like, you're like, ooh, I know what line everybody's expecting me to write here. Let me turn that a little bit. The one I always think of, there's a Courtney Milan novel, After the Wedding. And it's about a Black man who's disguised briefly as a footman. Yeah. And he gets shotgun married to a housemaid for some terrible reason by the villain. And then they spend the rest of the book road tripping to try to get it annulled, while of course falling in love because it's a romance. But the first time she sees him, she thinks he's really beautiful. And what she thinks about is the contrast of the darkness of his skin against the pale linen of his shirt. And there's this like, there's a charge in that, the darkness versus the lightness there. And I knew instantly what Courtney Milan was doing with that, because older romances will often contrast the paleness of the heroine's skin with the darkness of the hero's skin, but he's not supposed to be black or brown or a person of color. He's supposed to just be, quote, swarthy. Yeah. And it's to show that he's masculine and outdoorsy and rugged and tough and tan, even though he's, a duke who spent his entire life being cosseted at the top of Regency England. For some reason, he has abs for days. I'm sure it's something about ordering footmen around gives you abs, right? Like, but
like ordering footmen is like CrossFit. That's how it works.
Yeah. Drinking scotch, good for the biceps.
Yeah. Wish that worked.
That's how Gaston does it. But I got distracted by mocking dukes, as I often do.
Oh, you were talking about Courtney Milan setting up.
Yes. So instead of having this like, and you saw this like in countless old novels, especially during like the sex scenes, like the dark skin, light skin contrast was supposed to really like highlight the masculine feminine duality or something. And it's like, yeah, human eyes artistically were drawn to color contrasts. Like in art training, you learn to put your areas of highest contrast at the focal point, because that's where the eye's going to go. And then your complementary, like your muted colors and everything goes elsewhere. But like the really stark differences are what draw the eye. And she managed to get that kind of artistic version of the contrast and make it really beautiful, while also completely sidestepping this whole problem of, ooh, different skin tones is sexy, which is like this whole universe of problematic. Yeah. And it was just one tiny little line, and I'm like, oh my God, I need an essay to explain why this sentence is amazing.
Her books are so much fun anyway. Like just
yeah, you talked about staying up late, and I stayed up till about 2:30 last night reading The Devil Comes Courting.
I've had that. I've had that. Like I had pre-ordered it, and so it's basically waiting someday on my e-reader for a day when I need it. Because I don't know,
Yeah.
but I've started doing this thing. I started doing it years ago, and it was not a conscious thing, but I just realized at some point that was a weird thing I was doing. The more excited I was about a book, oftentimes I would get it and take it home or order it on my e-reader, and then not read it. Like it would just sit on my shelf, sort of like getting that fancy chocolate, putting there, and like someday.
Yes, when I need it, when I've earned it.
And so like I didn't consciously start doing it, but it is definitely a thing that I do. Like the more excited I am about something, and it seems very strange.
Well, and it's like, you know, if you're really into an author's work, there's always a worry that maybe you won't be as into the next book, not because it's bad even, but just because it won't hit you the same way. And then you're like, but I want to hold on to this feeling of admiration and excitement.
Because sometimes sometimes it's not even what the author is doing. It's just the fact that, like you talked about, you know, archetypes and things like that. We all have preferences, and so there are ones that you know, like that I know aren't my favorite. So like it might be something that another group of readers is going to love, and maybe that won't be my favorite book, but the next one might be. And so I'll usually give, unless an author does something that I find really horrifying, which is rare. I'll still be like, well, this one didn't work for me, but like I'm getting the next one because that one might be more my style. But to be fair, if they manage to pull off one of those things that's not my favorite thing, I'm like, I don't like this very much, but I love it here. Like to me, that's so impressive. Just
and there are definitely authors where I'm like, oh, Alexis, like love triangle premise. That sounds really stressful, but it's Alexis Hall. What am I gonna do? Like, I've read enough Alexis Hall at this point that I trust Alexis Hall with this. Like, Alyssa Cole can literally write any trope under the sun, and I'm like, sure, yeah,
I'll give it a go.
Sign me up. It's gonna be great. I want to see how she's gonna do this.
Yeah, because like when you have that trust in the author, where like I know that they'll pull it off.
Yeah.
And so like there was a series. It was an urban fantasy series that I read, which is Alona Andrews. And they're very good at this. What they'll do is they'll write like an alpha hero where I'll be like, oh, it's off-putting, and then I know that they're gonna flip it on me. Like they'll find some way to flip it around. And one of it was they did a book from the point of view of one of the villains from earlier in the series who had done really, I mean, horrible things. And I'm like, it's gonna be hard for you to redeem someone who you've seen kill beloved characters on the page. But partway through the book, I'm just like, he's just misunderstood. I mean, they're so good at flipping it around where I'm like, you don't forgive them for what they've done, but they find the sympathy point.
Yes.
So you see how they got there. And so I feel like we've gotten off topic of your books though. I have all these questions for you. So many questions.
Yeah.
So you picked the jobs first, which weaving and composing, were those things you were already interested in, or because I mean like the research, it's already, I could see it in the book. And so
the piano actually comes from my childhood. I grew up around pianos and people knew how to play, and my parents put me in lessons really early, and I was terrible at practicing because everybody's terrible at practicing. Yeah, like nobody ever practices the piano, but like actually a few months back we ended up buying a digital piano just because I'd been writing this whole book and I really wanted to get back into it. And I'm like, you know, I'm a grown-up, and I was like, oh my gosh, somebody started, author Emma Barry started the hashtag romance pianists just to like encourage people to practice every day. And it didn't have to be a keyboard. Like I was playing with the ukulele for a while, and then, and so it's still going. She's like heroically keeping it up. But I remember I had such envy. And at some point I'm like, oh, I was telling Charles about it, and I was like, oh, Charles, Mr. Waite, they're starting this hashtag where people are going to practice the piano every day. And he's like, are you saying we need to get a piano? And I'm like, oh, no, that's too. Yeah, we need to get a piano. Like, let's look into this. And it turns out like the one space in our apartment where we didn't know quite what to do with it and had just been kind of sitting there with a little window is exactly the right dimensions for the digital piano that we wanted.
That's funny.
And so now we have a little music corner. Like, And it's been absolutely wonderful. And it comes with headphones, so we don't bug the neighbors. And it also comes with a bunch of different keyboard voicings, which acoustic pianos never had. So this is just a whole new, it's like a candy store. So I can put up the extremely simplified Elton John like sheet music that I have and play it in the style of a church organ, which is amazing. Just for the record.
I'm sure my parents wished they'd had something like that when I was playing piano. Especially
the headphones are key.
Well, my dad had this dream of me like playing classical music and how lovely, and of course I'm at that age, I'm like, well, if that's what you want, then that's not what I'm going to play. And so I was drawn more towards like ragtime and popular tunes now. Like I learned how to play Everything I Do It For You by Bryan Adams.
Yes, that was one of the first pieces I learned to sight read.
The theme from Cheers, whatever. It was, the 90s.
Oh, The Lion King. The Lion King was everywhere.
To my father's horror. I mean, that's what I wanted to play. And so I'm sure he would have loved for me to have, so he wouldn't have to listen to what I was doing. Was there anything when you were doing your research, was there anything that was like the favorite thing that you've discovered? Like something maybe surprising or?
Oh man, no, there's like all of it. I mean, it's so fun. The convict coins was definitely like probably top 3, just because it was such a weird thing to do. And one of the things that I didn't actually get to work in, I was desperately trying to figure out how to work this into the plot, but like a lot of the, like Mrs. Money has a whole like backstory and just huge adventures in Australia that I just could not find any excuse to tell people about. But one of the ways that they thought, because when they shipped women to Australia, convicts and convicted women, they thought, well, we can't let them be idle during the voyage. So they actually kind of made them work. And what they made them do was embroidery and sewing. And so these convict ships full of women would make quilts during the journey. And like there was this idea that they could fundraise with them, or they would give them as a thank you to the governor's wife, or all the usual terrible British things that you would expect from the way that charity functioned. Oh yes, give them an honest occupation kind of a thing. But these quilts are stunning. And like some of them do seem very sincerely like, oh yes, you are the captain's wife, you've been very kind to us. Have this quilt that we made in the hold of the ship where we're being transported as a punishment. And it's this incredible, incredible body of work. And it's staggering. And I'm like, why are more people not diving into this? Like all the reading about, in Karen Feeding of Waspish Widows, we go to Brandenburg House for a big protest. And it's like a big outdoor protest / party, which honestly I wrote before last summer, but which last summer I'm like, oh yeah, this is how people do protests. Is there's the angry, scary, violent ones, and then there's the ones where everybody brings barbecue, and sometimes they're the same protest. Like it'll start as one and end as the other. But like, yeah, so the Queen's hanging out at Brandenburg House, and she has no real political power, but she has a lot of political symbolic power. And you have all of these other people who couldn't vote, but who have a lot of also symbolic power. And they were kind of, oh, there's an academic term, I'm sure, not reifying, but something like it. But they were absolutely performing the symbolic power as best as they could, and it had a political influence, even though they had no vote, and a lot of these people were poor, and the Queen was never officially crowned because she was forbidden from entering the coronation because George was a jerk. They actually had I saw sketches and paintings of this whole thing at Brandenburg House, this big giant protest where everybody showed up and read letters to the Queen, who read responses back, and people were selling things, and the water, like all the gentlemen and the ladies were being ferried around, and it was astonishing. And I'm like, why don't we talk about this? If I had to say number one moment, it's somebody like breaking the windows and like insulting the Duke of Wellington 4 years after Waterloo, because he doesn't support the queen. Like, I'm like the hero who saved them all from Napoleon, and they're like, yeah, but what have you done for us lately? And you would, if you'd put that in a book, people would be like, well, come on, it's 4 years after Waterloo. Surely Wellington's still everybody's hero. And it's like, no, they were very disappointed in this.
Well, and I never underestimate the ability for people like to hold a grudge. I mean, like there are some people who could make it an Olympic sport. I mean, where that they can just, you know, my grandma's still salty about things that happened like 60 years ago, and like she'll die salty. I mean, it's just some people are like just really good at that, and so I'm like, yeah. 4 years later, of course, they're throwing rocks through windows. So one thing I noticed, you have two characters who are very much built around, in a sense, like what they do. I mean, one thing I loved especially was like Sophie a lot of times sees the world through her music. I mean, like people are described as sounding like instruments and everything, which I thought was a lovely touch. But both of them also are dealing with something that has brought them love and made them whole, but also has brought them pain, in a sense. You know, at the beginning, like Sophie can barely touch a piano. And Maddie looks at her loom and it's like, this is the thing I loved as a child, and now like I want to smash it. And that's through like the other smaller characters too sort of echo that theme. I mean, you know, Sophie's mom can't perform anymore, and you meet, I'm blanking on his name, but the violinist that came
the elder Mr. Frampton,
who was I loved him so much.
I love him so much.
So great. And so it's like it was great to see sort of that theme echo out. Did you do that consciously, or is it one of those things that kind of just showed up and you're like, oh, that's great, I'm smart?
No, I think a lot of it was definitely a lot of anxiety. I've always kind of, the line from the poem, at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hovering near, that thing. You shouldn't show that kind of thing to teenagers, because then it sticks in their head and they just carry it around and it develops into an anxiety. But like, you know, the relentless march of time worries me and it scares me. And I know that there's going to come a time when there will be things that I love that I can no longer do, because that is the nature of being human, is at some point we stop. And so if you're doing like, as an artist and as a writer, my goal is always to get a little better than I was the day before.
Yeah.
And I know that there's going to come a point when I would either have to stop doing it, or when I will be stopped from doing it for one reason or another. And I would think this was me trying to like feel out, what are you going to do then? You're gonna have to do that. So, and ideally I could have done older characters in this book, like maybe even older than Penelope and Agatha from book 2, because then like that arc kind of pleased me, because as it is, we start with real aristocrats, and then we have the aristocrats are the villains, and then we have the only aristocrats are fake aristocrats, which is a very fun arc that I enjoyed doing. But I also wanted to do like, you know, younger characters, middle-aged characters, and then older characters. The only problem is, according to all the research, like weaving was the job of mostly like younger women. It's like, and you know, you have the male handloom weavers as well, and I just honestly kind of didn't care about them. They're fine. There's lots of them. They seem swell, but but there's also there's a lot of interesting tensions, like what fabric are you weaving? And male handloom weavers were threatened by female weavers because they would work for cheaper rates, and so they were seen as competition. And so there's all of these like weird gender things, and part of me was like, oh, maybe I should get into that, and I'm like, that's gonna stress me out, and this is a heist. And like,
you know, and I think honestly it's sort of nice, because I think a lot of times we don't, as a people in our culture, talk to younger people about what happens when your dream dies. Because I mean, like, you know, there's that, you know, to me that was always something that I would look at, you know, the friends that were athletes or something, where one broken bone and like everything you've spent 20 years doing, you can't do anymore. And if it's something you loved, like, what do? how do you come back from that? Like, how do you move forward? And so I think it's interesting to see it from a younger perspective as well as the older, because I had the same thing where I was talking to a customer in Third Place Books one day about, I don't even know how we got on the topic, honestly, because I was a cashier. We were talking about Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something that like I'm worried about. Like it seems so scary to me. And she's like, well, she's like, but you're so young. And I was like, yeah. She's like, do you have it in your family? No. She's like, well, why would it worry you then? I'm like, because you can't get to your brain, and I need my brain for things, specifically writing things. Like I can't, obviously writers still function because you had Terry Pratchett and Agatha Christie, who both still wrote books, but you struggle, and it's hard enough for me to keep track of plots and things. And so for me, losing access to my brain functioning properly, or my hands or things like that, like it was.
I think about the hands a lot.
Something I know people get around it, and there are tons of people that write and create and everything, but it's still kind of that fear of something that I love and is already can be very difficult to do. More roadblocks in the way, and losing that thing. Like, what would I do? What would I do if I couldn't write anymore? And honestly, I can't answer that question. I don't think I'd be a very nice person. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, I've been actually having some like mild aching hands this year. That's been one of the fun mystery things. But it's really brought home to me how much of not just my work, but my leisure activities like knitting and the beadwork and the video games. And I'm like, I need these for like all of them. And so, I mean, partly it's also, I should definitely read more from like the disability side of Twitter, because those people have solved problems I do not even know about. And they've done it in the face of some really staggering challenges and and continued like prejudice, like on virtually all levels of society. It's something, some insanely high percentage of human beings will end their lives with a disability. That's how it works. That's human bodies not being made for immortality. Like,
no, this is breaking down. Like this is a
we have this idea that your body, it will always function, and your body, like as you grow and change, your body will like just get better and stronger, and then that's just not true, like on any level.
And for me too, like it's a worry, because like I said, I do get, if I haven't written in a while, I get really grouchy. And so I'm like, I think my family would probably kick me out if I stopped writing. Not because they need me to do that, if it's my job, but because
you would just be awful.
I'd be awful.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, there was a woman writer, I'm trying to remember who it was, where it was someone like Madeline Lingle or Ursula Gwynn or something, where she felt bad that she wasn't spending enough time with her family, so she kind of like cut back on the writing. It was doing things with them, and then after a little bit they sort of stage an intervention, like, look, we love you, like this is great, get back in your role, kind of thing. Like, just you need to be in there for reasons, which I always thought was really funny, because I
can believe that of either author, to be honest.
I think my family would 100% do that to me. So we're hitting our quarter hour mark.
So we are.
So I have one more question for you. And so if you're not currently planning on continuing feminine pursuits, which I think you could, you've got so much there you could work with. What do you think you're going to do next? Like, can you talk about it? Is that something that
I've got a couple of projects kind of in medias res, in the middle of things that I'm slowly in the building process of. They're all over the map, basically. I'm looking into some queer lady spy stuff. I'm looking into some sci-fi. I'm looking into, there's a really ambitious thing I'm not even going to talk about, but I'm so excited about doing it. It's ridiculous. I have no business trying it, and it's going to be great.
You're not, I think there was like an interview with David Bowie where he talks about, if you're not slightly uncomfortable with what you're doing, then you're not pushing yourself enough. Like, when you're doing something creative, you have to make yourself, you have to try, you raise the bar, keep raising the bar. And I think that's it can make it difficult and scary. But if I'm not comfortable writing something. Usually that means I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, but there's comfortable, and then there's like, oh my God, what am I even doing?
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got midpoints on the way to the ambitious thing. And fortunately, that ambitious thing is still very much in the research process. So there's a lot of things. I'm very excited about whatever is next because I have way more ideas than any one person can ever write, which is probably also why I feel that time pressure.
And that's why I'm usually like juggling like 3 different books at once. Actually, I thought of you at the spy thing yesterday because I was reading up on how the British Secret Service used Monopoly to get things to the Allied troops or the Allied prisoners to help them escape.
Seriously?
Yeah. So they snuck it. You will love this. They basically work because they were allowed to give like care packages. Like
Yeah.
The Nazis would let them give care, which I think is so bizarre. Would let them give care packages to their soldiers, and so Monopoly games were already going over there. So they basically talked to a game manufacturer about like sneaking in a compass and a map, and they put them on silk. So
and it folds up real small.
So but it's also so it wouldn't make noise. And God, what was it? They had a compass, a map, and there was like some other things in there. I'm like, this.
Yeah, there's like a tiny lockpick or something like.
So it helped help prisoners escape. What a bizarre.
Oh, let me tell you, like you start researching spy methods from like the Cold War era. I am not even kidding you. Fake testicles. Because they're like, well, they're not really going to search everywhere, right? And so you'd have this little, carry-all. And then there's the one where if you want to like debrief an agent without people knowing, you have the agent dressed in a dog costume and then you put them in a kennel and take them to, quote, the vet at the safe house. Not all of these things were manufactured and not all of these things were used in the field. The dog definitely wasn't. But yeah, in 1953, the most famous magician in America wrote a manual for the CIA. And it's since been found and republished. It was part of the whole MK Ultra nonsense, all the CIA mind control stuff. I've gone way too many deep dives into conspiracies on this, but he wrote a manual for the CIA on using magician's tricks and misdirection and, all that kind of thing in spycraft. And they thought all the copies had been destroyed, and then somebody found one and republished it. So it's actually available in print and is astonishing. Like, they used to do like one of the reasons dead drops are called dead drops is because, well, no, probably not one of the reasons why they're called dead drops, but I have to imagine it is. They actually used to use like dead rats and pigeons and things to like hide messages in to be received because they would be completely innocuous on like a city street. Well, they had to start dousing the rats. They had to start dousing the rats with hot sauce because the local cats would carry them off before the agents could retrieve the message. And like, just little details like that, and I'm like, this is a wonderful world of hideous stories. Coins that have secret compartments in them, and just ridiculous things. Like you squeeze the piece on give peace a chance and it opens and you can put a microfilm in to smuggle across borders, and things that I kept looking at the authors and I'm like, am I sure this book is real? But like, there's a former director of the CIA putting his name on this, and I'm like, if he's gone full The Onion, that's weird. Like,
well, a lot of history is like that, though, where you're like, it seems so weird, but it can't be real, and yet it is. Like, the weirder it is, but it comes back to that whole like, I don't know about you, but when I was learning writing and stuff, I had a professor tell me like the fastest way to get someone to not believe something in a story is to put something real in there. And that was true. Like if I snuck in like an anecdote or something of my own, and people are like, that just doesn't seem realistic, and I'm like, that's funny because I did it.
2020 really kind of taught us all that, didn't it? Like, every writer I knew was like, if I put this in a book, my editor would call me a hack, and rightly so.
I can't top it. So we have a question on the Q&A.
Oh, yes.
Was what's a trope you haven't written yet but love to read?
Oh my God. I don't know if it's a trope. I love like queer MF romances. You know, if somebody's trans, if somebody's bisexual, especially like I really want to write a bi MF couple one of these days. I've been really enjoying writing FF heroines. It's been a huge break from writing about like dudes, especially ballroom dudes, where it gets very like my backlist. There comes a point where you can tell I'm starting to get bored with aristocrats because I start giving them things to do. So like there's the painter, and there's the the painter was the most recent one, and he marries the lock-picking thief, and you know, so that's probably the first one. I definitely want to write queer MF, but there's so many tropes. Eventually I want to do everything. I honestly want to do fated mates at some point. I want to do an aphrodisiac type story if I can figure out how to not make it creepy, which is the hard thing about aphrodisiacs, because they're gonna be creepy.
It's true. It's hard.
I think you need an antidote, like, which I haven't seen a lot of, and I don't read enough fanfic to be well versed in how this is handled in the fic. So I would have to do a deep dive, obviously, to see what the common tropes are.
Sometimes
Darn.
you have to take one for the team. Do the thing you'd want to do anyway.
Yeah, I have yet to meet a trope I don't want to write on some level.
I'm trying to think if there's any that I'm so like towards that I don't want to do it, but usually it's just kind of like, well, then I wouldn't know how to handle it in this sense, because there's ones that I'm not usually, that are not my favorite.
Secret Baby.
Yeah, Secret Baby. I have a harder time with friends to lovers, but if it's done well, I love it. It's just one of those things where, and again, it's not the authors, like they're all doing fine. It's just that you know, I grew up with a lot of male friends, and so it was a constant, every time they'd start dating someone, you know, it's, oh, you have a friend that's a girl, and that weird, like, you'd have to come like, look, I don't want to date them. They're like, I know them too well. They're all yours. Like, just like, I'm not a threat. It was a constant thing. Or from friends or family going like, well, you spend all your time with them and your friends, like, why don't you date them? I'm like, because I don't want to date them, and they don't want to date me. We're fine. Yeah. And so like sometimes reading fiction, like, can they just be good friends? But when it's done really well, I love it to bits. And so
I think it is hard to do well. It takes time, for one thing. Like, because you have to have a sense of the friendship, and then you have to have a reason for it to change, and it has to be a good reason. It can't just be like, oh my God, she took her glasses off. And it's like, dude, I don't know if you think these hide more.
Especially it's like when you're good friends with somebody, they've already seen you.
Yeah.
You know, in your pajamas, probably, your hair, like all drool, probably, spilling food. Oh yeah. I mean,
falling asleep on the couch, like, spilling the popcorn.
They've seen it.
Yeah.
So it's like taking off the glasses and suddenly they're gorgeous. So I'm like, well, then clearly you weren't close friends. My friends have seen all kinds of things that they should not ever tell anyone about.
Yeah. I do like the kind of thing where we've been close friends forever, but we've been silently mutually pining and never talking about it. Like, that makes me very happy.
I'm trying to think if there's any other tropes that I would find. I think the ones that I'm not as into. I know they exist, but my mind has gone blank.
Yeah, I'm extremely picky about alpha males, like extremely. Because like, yeah, I was actually rereading the third Bridgerton book recently and remembering why I never reread the third Bridgerton book.
Well, it's such a delicate balance, and what works for some readers, just like it might hit a note with me where I'm like, like, you know, and so alpha is such a it's a fight, because there's somewhere I'm like, in real life I would murder that person, but in page it works great.
Yeah, it's really about knowing that arrogance is going to get punctured a little bit, and like, I mean, Alyssa Cole, A Princess in Theory, he starts out so suave and confident and smooth, and he's like, I'm gonna be a master waiter, and it like giggled like mad. And like 3 seconds later, he's setting something at the table on fire, like, because he's been raised a prince, but he thinks, I will convince this. Anyways, it's delightful watching him flail.
It's hilarious, especially if anyone who's worked food service knows.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, you're gonna, oh, buddy.
Oh, this is gonna go real wrong really fast.
What was the, again, like, I know you read the Hidden Legacy books, and those were another one where
Yes.
in the
I
first,
think I'm one book behind. I haven't read the most recent one yet.
but the very first one, like, he starts off as, I mean,
Yeah.
arrogant, he kidnaps her, all these things where you're like, no, you're mean, and then you're like, nope. By like half the book, you're like, he's great. But
Yeah,
it's hard to bring me on board.
that one's really nice because it's sneaky. Like at first you're like, oh my gosh, she's this human heroine trapped in this world of superpowered, and then you're like, hang on a minute. Wait, what? And it's slowly like, and then of course by the end with her sister, and like that may be one of my favorite reveals in any paranormal series ever, is
that one. I think I like it was one of the few times where I finished a book and I thought, can I just start over and read it again? Like, can I just go
do
back?
that.
Which you
real
can. I don't usually do. Usually if I read a book that's really wonderful and I loved, I immediately try to go read something else, like different, because otherwise I'm gonna have sort of the book hangover where I just sit
Oh
around.
yeah.
But that one I honestly can, I'm like, I could just start it back over. Which I
Yeah.
think what I did is I got the audiobook instead.
Oh, that makes sense.
Then I just listened to it. And so
Then it's like, then it's a performance, then it's different. Like theater, you can watch the same play back to back.
there you go. Danielle says Secret Siblings is one that she can't get behind. The Secret Siblings, like they're dating, or because I
don't know. Like,
yeah.
no. Oh, that, yeah, like accidental incest, that's a big no.
Even if it's close. Like there was a book series that I read that I liked, and it's an author that I like. So I'm maybe not going to mention what it is, but the love interest was a former step sibling, which, I mean, they're not related. Like the family, because, you know, but they were raised together
Mhm.
to a certain extent.
See, and that's the thing, like
the family together. And as someone who has a lot of step in her life, not necessarily siblings, but in general, I look at them and go, no. It's like, it was really hard for me to like back that romance. It's like, again, there's nothing wrong. They weren't doing anything wrong. And there are lots of people that end up marrying ex-step siblings and stuff. It's not, but following along for me with my background, I'm like,
See, and I don't mind, like, as long as they weren't raised together. Like if, our parents have been married and we kind of hate each other, but now I guess we're making out. It's like, sure, like it's the growing up as siblings part that really kind of, that's
and
the
this one they'd grown up for a significant chunk, and then basically had to end up being the parents. Like the parents, I can't remember what happened to them, but they ended up having to like raise.
Yeah, that
raise
sounds stressful.
Together, and then I'm like,
yeah.
I mean, it was not to the level of all the books that we, I think, read as teenagers. Which
V.C. Andrews. Yes.
Andrews, which like one of my friends devoured, like read all of her books, and I read like 2, and I was like, I don't think these are for me.
She's one of those authors where it's romance adjacent, but you can never call them romance, but literally every romance reader has probably tried it at some point.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I read the synopsis, like I think I read part of Flowers in the Attic as a kid, and then I read the synopsis for the sequel, and I was just like, jaw-dropping every other line in the, oh my gosh, it was such a catastrophe.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm sure that's the fun, because
there's a lot of like sibling.
We love gothics. And that's what they are. It's because they're gothics. So they've got that, like, that, oh my gosh, monstrous, somebody's secretly a murderer, there's something living in the attic.
We're all related. That was another thing too. Everyone was related. And like, so those were like, those books are for you. I will support you in reading them. I'm going to go find something else.
Yeah, I much prefer the classic gothic where a lady on the cover is running away from a house in a nightgown. Like,
those are fun.
And or setting the house on fire. Like Rose Lerner's most recent FF retelling of Jane Eyre. which is terrifying and brilliant and gave me nightmares. Like, I was reading it and then I fell asleep and I was on this like plain by the sea and the air was hot and there was the scent of smoke, and I'm like, I know who to blame for this setting. No, this is not okay.
I started because I haven't read that one yet. Although I do love Rose Lerner. I do. I mean,
Yeah,
not
this
just
is,
the person,
it's
but the
technically
person.
a Lively St. Lemiston book, but like Lively St. Lemiston goes murdery. It's
I love
really-
those books. I was like, I should read Jane Eyre first, and I started reading it, and I started messaging Rose, where I'm like,
You should just watch the movie. Just like
I don't
pick
know,
a Jane
I don't know
Eyre
if-
and watch
I
the
don't know if
movie.
I can get through it. Like I have a hard time. But it was like there's so much of it. I'm like, this seems like, because she is so knowledgeable, like historically speaking. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Rose's brain is beautiful.
Yes.
And so like I basically, it's like having a teacher where I'm like, I'm reading this thing, explain. Yeah. So and I see Allie has joined us because
Blasted is the hour.
Oh, yes.
So I have one last question before we go. Basically, I just want to give you each a chance to plug the next thing that is on the docket, if it is something that you can talk about, always. But please, what is next for each of you?
Lish, you want to start?
I can start. So I have Curses comes out, what day is it? July 20th, and we're doing one of these through Third Place Books on July 19th, where I'll be talking to Marissa Meyer, which is going to be great fun because
Nice.
if you haven't read her books, she is big into fairy tale retellings, and I particularly like
She did Cinder, right?
Cinder, and which I loved, though Scarlet is I think my favorite because I love Wolf.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
Marissa knows. I told her repeatedly where I'm like, I love Wolf. She's like, Lish, shut up. We know, like just stop. I'm like, but I do. I mean, adorable, like werewolf cage fighter. Yeah. You just I mean, take my money. Here you go. Here's all of it. But she's a delight. And so we'll be talking on the 19th. I'm also interviewing Will Ritter here. I forgot what day, but it's on the Third Place website for his book Oddmire, which are great fun, middle grade, fancy delightfulness. Other than that, what if the things that I have written that I'm working on, I don't know what I'm doing with them yet. So I don't like.
Yeah, it's hard when you're like, yeah, that'll be a year and a half plus away.
Maybe, you know, if the editor even accepts it, or
yes, the fun of being on submission / proposal.
Well, and I'm under contract for another book.
Oh, good, yeah.
But we didn't specify what that book was. And so I started writing the book, and I got halfway to. I'm like, I'm halfway done writing this book, and they're like, but we've not discussed it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure we did. They're like, no.
Oh dear.
I had to put that book aside and write something else that I pitched that I had nothing written on, and so I've been catching up on that, and then working on like an adult book that I will probably put out myself, which I've thrown at you and you're looking at it. But
yes, I am really into it. The baby phoenix in chapter 1 has my entire heart just in his little tiny burning claws. I just love. But I've got a few events coming up later. If you sign up for my newsletter at oliviawaite.com, you will hear specifically when those are. But we're doing a Bridgerton read-along for An Offer from a Gentleman, which is book 3 in the series, which is the one which has Sophie, the heroine, who's a housemaid. So we're going to talk a lot about Regency jobs, and I'm doing that with Alexandria Bellefleur, who's a local romance author as well, and she wrote Written in the Stars, the FF from last year, and she wrote Hang the Moon that just came out. And she and I are going to take over Avon's Instagram, and that's going to be on I forget if it's the 28th or the 29th, but it's going to be a good time. We're going to be talking about everything. We're going to be talking about tons of stuff. We're going to be talking about why can't Benedict be queer, all of the good stuff. And then there's a library panel later this year, and there's a bookstore romance day panel with me and Kat Sebastian and some other brilliant people whose names I can't remember. And there's a Romancing the Gothic panel. So sign up for the newsletter because honestly, I can't keep track in my head.
When I know over in the chat function, they meant, so yeah, Bookstore Romance Day is August 15th. And if you've never attended, I believe this virtual this year. If you've never attended, there's so much going on. It's so much fun. There's like tons of authors and cool things, and
it's a good time.
I love it.
It's a good time. Yes, come on in. We do stuff in the bookstore. We're always very excited about it. We love Bookstore Romance Day. So come on in, August 15th. Mark your calendars. And then I think, is there anything else that you two are burning to say?
No, I'm just
wonderful.
This has been really great. It was I got to go into third place for the first time in like a year, just the other day, and it was so good to see that you guys were still there and just taking care of the customers and being wonderful as always. So
yeah, it was a rough year for booksellers, and you know, I mean, it's a harder job than people think it is anyway, and I'm not just saying that because we were all booksellers, but it is, and it's something that, you know, we don't always take care of our booksellers, and so I'm glad that they're all okay. Like, it's great that we've done all sorts of things to keep them safe, but I'm really looking forward to the day where we can go in all the time safely and just sit down in the chair and open a book and support the people that make that actually a reality and a possibility.
Yeah, being able to just sit in the bookstore and browse for like an hour sounds like absolute luxury.
We are all looking forward to that. I think we're all ready for that. We're very excited as soon as it is safe. So let's see. Danielle says Third Place Books will have giveaways and store displays special for Bookstore Romance Day on August 21st and 22nd. So come on in. We would love to see you. Sorry, I got that date wrong. So let me say it one more time. August 21st and 22nd, not the 15th. 21st and 22nd.
I was the one who randomly said the 15th.
No, I said it too. we're all in it together. So
in the end.
So this has been just wonderful. Thank you both so much for being here. This has been so much fun. For all of you who would like to get your hands on a copy of the Hellions Waltz, please come on in. We would love to see you. We are open. You know, we can't let you stay for hours and read, unfortunately, but we are open. You can come on in and get your hands in person if you are local. If not, of course, we do ship. Let us know. Follow those links in the chat. If you come on in, let us know, let a bookseller know what you thought of this event, or of course you can tweet us. We would love to hear from you. Olivia and Lish, thank you one more time for this event. This was so much fun, such a great conversation to listen in on. And I think that this is where we say goodbye. So shall we let the awkward waving commence?
Oh yes, let's.
Yes, exactly. Good night, everyone.
Bye.